Hey Lucas, how are you doing?
Good.
Okay, great. So we're gonna start today's class now, and it seems like my mic is okay, but can you see my screen well?
Yeah.
All right, wonderful. So let's begin today's writing reading class. So the schedule looks like this today. We're gonna continue through our hero's journey review, go into a short story analysis. If there's time, we'll go into some literary technique review and discuss take a look at an author's written piece of work. And yeah, that's what our agenda looks like for today. So, if you remember from last week, I assigned you some homework to do because, well, we were running out of time. So, I wanted you to summarize a book, film, or series, or in your case, you said you wanted to do a video game as a part of the hero's journey in a similar fashion to in a similar fashion to this. So yeah, that was assigned as homework. Do you happen to have it finished?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, great. You can post what you've written in the chat. Thank you. Ooh, God of War. That's a good one. Let's see. Okay, so it's a little bit. Hey, great. Awesome. So could you read out your answer, please?
Um, a game that uses the hero's journey archetype is God of War. Kratos, one of the main characters,
Yeah.
is at peace with his son Atreus, later known as Loki, who is the other main character, and Kratos' wife, Laufey or Faye. The call to adventure is when Faye unexpectedly passes and asks Kratos to bring her ashes to the highest peak in all the realms, which is in Jotunheim, a realm in Norse mythology. They are in Midgard, the Earth-like realm. Kratos takes Atreus hunting to see if he is ready. Despite being a good hunter, Atreus is told he is not ready. This is what I presume to be the refusal to the call. As later in the story, Kratos states that Atreus is not ready, and neither is he. Later, Kratos and Atreus meet the Witch of the Woods. She lives in a smaller, more colorful section of the forest. Her house is under a massive and friendly turtle. The witch gives Kratos a mark which protects him from the eyes of Odin. She also gives Kratos a compass which would point to their goal. This is the supernatural aid provided. They walk into to the summit of a mountain in Midgard, which they believe to be the highest peak in all the realms. Their journey is halted by a strange black mist. The witch informs Kratos and Atreus that the light of Alfheim can rid of the mist. The three travel to Tyr's temple, which allows realm travel and is located in the middle of the Lake of Nine. As Kratos and Atreus slowly start exploring the realm, the witch is pulled back to Midgard. Odin had cast a spell on her to keep her in Midgard. This is when they cross the threshold. Kratos and Atreus are left alone in Alfheim to find the light. They see dark and light elves at war. The dark elves are winning the war and basically slaughter the light elves. The duo is forced to interfere with the war when the dark elves attack them. This is the point of no return.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lucas. Yeah, this is a lot to take in. Awesome. I don't see any issues with the stages you've assigned for each part of the story. Yeah, I haven't played God of War, but I have heard a lot about it. And yeah, this is pretty accurate. Awesome. Yeah. Again, I don't see any issues with the stages you assigned to each part. Well done. Okay, so regarding some grammar, punctuation, or general edits I want to make. Yeah, as you pointed out, this should say characters. So over here, I'm going to put brackets because what pointing out that he is later known as Loki. Throughout the entire passage of writing you wrote, you didn't really refer to him as Loki, so I would put this in brackets, or I would get rid of this part later known as Loki entirely. But for the sake of preserving what you wrote, I'm going to just add brackets here. And I'm going to add a comma over here. And so, whoops, I'm going to just rearrange something that you wrote since you refer to Laufey or Faye as Faye in the next sentence. I'd rather call her Faye first and then add brackets and then write or Laufey. So over here, gonna get rid of this comma because this one sentence that you wrote, it seems to be running for a long time. I'm going to add a period here, and then I'm going to modify this part. So here, capital T, like realm. Trace hunting to see if he is ready for the, what did I say, for the task. I'm adding this just to specify, just to clearly specify what Kratos is seeing, if what Atreus is quote unquote ready for. Again, just to specify. Yeah. Generally, I like the use of commas here. You are improving with your comma usage a lot. That's great. Sentence structure is improving a lot as well. So over here, I'm going to replace she with who lives in a smaller, more colorful section of the forest. And I'm going to just get rid of these parts because it doesn't really seem necessary. It just adds some quote unquote filler into the sentence that makes it a little trickier to read. So reading it now, later Kratos and Atreus meet the Witch of the Woods, who lives in a smaller, more colorful section of the forest under a massive and friendly turtle. I think that sounds a lot more smoother to read, a lot easier to read. Which gives Kratos a mark, which protects him. So I don't think a comma is necessary over here. It's a compass which would point to the goal. Mm-hmm. Midgard. The realms. And their journey is halted by a strange black mist. I would add and over here in instances like this. Jim form is Kratos. So I'm going to add a comma over here. Guard. Guard. Gonna add a conjunction here as Odin had cast a spell on her to keep her in Midgard. This is when they cross the threshold. Mm-hmm. So over here, I'm going to add And while doing so, just to connect the 2 points together, just to connect the components of the sentence together a lot more clearly, I'm adding this. So over here, I'm going to change that comma into a period. They see that the Dark Elves are winning the war and are slaughtering the elves. Basically, I don't think the use of the word basically here is really necessary. It just feels like a filler word. It doesn't really add much unless you're trying to characterize a particular character's speech or are speaking or are narrating from a character's perspective. Basically adds some personality, but I don't think using that word is necessary here when you're trying to explain, well, in this instance, how the hero's journey is utilized in the game you analyzed. More with then which is which I think is the point of no return. Yeah, a couple of grammar and punctuation errors I had to make, but yeah, your analysis of the game, really good in terms of the hero's journey. Everything is explained really well. Everything is seems accurate to what you're describing. Yeah, you did an amazing job, Lucas. Awesome. Before I move on, do you have any questions about anything or concerns?
No.
All right. So I'll move on to some more about character archetypes. If you remember our discussion about archetypes at first, these basically are molds of characters, like particular roles characters can take. So Joseph Campbell, the guy who made the hero's journey, if you recall, he has his own set of character archetypes that he created. These archetypes mostly fitting in with his idea of the hero's journey. Yeah, so a couple of archetypes are really similar to the archetypes we discussed before, like the hero. I'll go through the ones we've talked about already rat quickly. So the hero takes on many different appearances. Campbell states that the hero begins in what is referred to as their quote unquote ordinary life or where they live or where their hometown is, where they're most comfortable in. Because if you recall in the hero's journey, it's mostly about a hero stepping outside their comfort zone, entering new territory, and trying to accomplish their task at hand. Maybe the hero's eager for change. Maybe the hero's in a transitional moment of their life. Maybe they need to figure things out. And in the hero's journey, these heroes typically have a journey forced onto them, either by someone's passing, for example, or an urgent matter. The journey calls them for one reason or another. And the hero is then thrust into an adventure that makes up the structure of the hero's journey. So the Herald, Lucas, could you read out the description for the Herald, please?
The Herald brings about change. The Herald is an exciting incident, marking the call to adventure. They can be mentors like Gandalf. The Herald might only appear once in a story, like the horror trope of the scary gas station attendant who says, excuse me for a second.
Yeah, take your time.
Sometimes the herald brings information our hero is not ready to hear or accept. Sometimes the herald gets to stick around as a mentor or ally. Sometimes the herald isn't even human. The one thing that makes a herald is that they mark the beginning of the journey. Oftentimes, as Campbell explains in his hero's journey, there is a moment of doubt after the herald, where our hero questions whether they are the right person for the job.
Yeah, thank you, Lucas. So the Herald is basically the character that recruits the designated hero character to go into this journey. They're the one that helps to convince the hero sometimes to go on this journey, or the one that brings the task upon them, like Gandalf, or as we discussed a couple of classes ago, Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars. Relatively simple stuff so far. Pretty easy concepts to understand right now. So we have the mentor, who was an archetype that we discussed in previous classes. So I'll go over this one. Yeah, the mentor, they can sometimes be the one that's responsible for providing supernatural aid to the protagonists or hero. They're very important. And yeah, if you recall, they are actually listed as one of the steps or stages of the hero's journey monomyth. Yeah, they're that important. Sometimes they're from the extraordinary world. They support and challenge the hero in some sort of way. And the ally, just basically cut and dry, just allies. They're the ones that aid the hero, typically occurring as the hero exits their own personal comfort realm and entering the new supernatural realm or undefined place or crossing the threshold. Sometimes the hero recruits allies as they progress through their adventure, and allies could be characterized. They could be characterized in different ways. They could either be boring, simple, and just provide the character with support, such as providing a chamber for them to echo out their thoughts, feelings, and anxieties. Sometimes the ally could be more complex, challenge the hero, reflect the hero's personalities. They could act as foils sometimes. Okay, here we have the Threshold Guardian, a rather unique concept for the hero's journey. Could you read the description for the Threshold Guardian, please?
The Threshold Guardian is a character or object that is there to ask whether our protagonist wants to change enough to make it through the journey. They aren't the main antagonist, and sometimes they aren't even an antagonist, but they serve to stop and question whether our hero wants his goals badly enough, or to remind our hero why he wants to succeed and go on the journey. As the title as the title implies, the Threshold Guardian keeps our hero and challenges our hero before they go into a new threshold, before they enter the belly of the beast. To get past the Threshold Guardian, our hero must realize something about themselves and change. They must gather the real strength to finish their journey. The Sphinx is a classic example of a Threshold Guardian. They stand in front of the entrance to a city and ask riddles. In the hero's journey, our hero has to lose something to be reborn. Transfiguration. Sometimes the Threshold Guardian is the one who helps give the hero that death and rebirth.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lucas. So yeah, the Threshold Guardian, they're not necessarily aligned with either good or bad. Uh, they exist to serve as a way for the hero to question whether they're ready to take on the task at hand or not. They helps the hero to recognize something about themselves, maybe even change, maybe get stronger so that they can find the motivation to finish their journey and discover themselves in the process. So, for example, over here we have this is a unique one, the furnace from Home Alone. Just as an example, that furnace initially scares the main character, Kevin, but like as time goes on, Kevin must face that furnace in order to bypass the thieves that break into the house. Just an example of like how a Threshold Guardian could serve to make a character stronger while they go on this so-called hero's journey. So just a little short writing prompt. I want you to try to recall a moment when you had to face your own Threshold Guardian. So write about a moment. I want you to write about a moment where you were faced with a new challenge or opportunity and maybe had to overcome very personal or other types of barriers to achieve the goal you wanted, sometimes in the form of a Threshold Guardian. And I'll give you 7 minutes to write about that moment. Do you have any questions? .
No.
All right. Yeah, 7 minutes. I'll let you get started now. Okay, time's up. Are you finished, Lucas?
Yeah.
Right, awesome. Wonderful. Could you read out your writing, please?
On a Thursday evening nearly a year ago, my father and mother decided to take me outside to play football. Unfortunately, there was a team practicing on the field, preventing us from playing. My parents wanted me to play goalkeeper for them, which I could, but I was too shy to. That should be a 002.
Ah, okay.
Too
So,
shy to ask them or have my parents ask. Disregarding my opinion, my father kickstarted my club football career by asking the coach if I could play in goal for their shooting drill. The coach agreed, and I did well enough to make it into the club.
hmm, okay. Thank you, Lucas. Yeah. So, your threshold guardian in this case seemed to be your shyness or potential anxiety about like asking the other team. That's interesting. Nice. Very abstract concept of a threshold guardian, but I like it. Yeah. So, this case, yeah, I'll just modify this first. Maybe extra O. Us. So I added the for us over here for them. So I'm gonna add a comma here. My parents wanted me to play goalkeeper for them, which I could, but I was too shy to ask them. I had my parents ask. Disregarding my opinion, my father kickstarted my club to the club. Yeah, overall, great writing about how you encountered some sort of barrier or threshold guardian that prevented you from stepping into the quote unquote unknown world. In this case, it would be joining the football club. But next time if you wanted to come up with an example of this, I feel like would have been more effective of a threshold guardian example of sorts if you explained how you yourself would have overcame this threshold guardian rather than someone else doing it for you. I understand that's because you're trying to take from a real life example, you might not have something immediately in your mind at the moment. But when you're writing characters, just to bring up, the threshold guardian that the character faces, they usually overcome the questions that come from that threshold guardian on their own. This is still a good answer to the prompt I asked you to do, though. So, yeah, great job. So now we're going to move on to the next couple of archetypes that Campbell came up with. So here's the shapeshifter. Could you read the description for the shapeshifter, please?
This character archetype is a character who changes alliances at some point during the journey. This character serves to complicate our hero's journey and asks the audience and our hero, is there a clear right and wrong, black and white? This character can also serve as a great twist in your film, further building up the stakes. Sebastian from Little Mermaid was sent with Ariel on the journey to Mona Terra, and as a spy of sorts, but quickly becomes an ally to Ariel. In Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Roderick, the brother, often interchanges from an antagonist to an ally. Vino from Do the Right Thing is a really interesting character in his alliance to his brother, his family, or to his friend Mookie.
Yeah, thank you, Lucas. So the shapeshifter, as in the name, they swap sides, sometimes frequently in the story. Like Sebastian and Roderick, they change from being enemies to the ally or supposed enemies to the protagonist to allies to the protagonist. They're quite interesting characters whose intentions and change of mind can be explored very greatly. Very complex characters and very interesting to write about. Next, we have the Trickster. Could you read the description for the Trickster, please?
You can identify a trickster because they live outside of society's norms and are often misunderstood. They are often comedic relief, sometimes self-interested. The trickster can play tricks that lead to good or bad outcomes. They are often not taken seriously, but ultimately are smarter than they let on. Through their otherness, they find success for themselves and the hero. Again, sometimes these archetypes are combined. Sometimes you have a trickster mentor or a trickster hero. The trickster brings a little bit of chaos to the story, disrupting for good and bad the arc of the story. Chief Bromden in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Cuckoo.
Cuckoo. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. If you read the book, he is the protagonist, but in the film, he serves more as a mentor. He pretends not to be able to hear or speak. He doubts his own power, even though he's ridiculously strong. In the end, he's the one who helps McMurphy, who ultimately is also a bit of a trickster.
Yeah, thank you, Lucas. So the Trickster, as in the description, they're not a character typically found in the story's normal, quote unquote, normal society. And because of such, they aren't understood as well as other characters that live on this so-called normal society. Sometimes tricksters, yeah, they are comedic relief. Tricksters can also be explored a bit in terms of their personality or why they are misunderstood. And as in the paragraph down here, some archetypes can be combined. Like the hero could also be a trickster. He could be a misunderstood individual who earns who earns recognition by the end of the story once they complete their journey, for example. Yeah, tricksters are commonly combined with other archetypes in order to make those characters more interesting and more complex, more dynamic. It allows the reader to gain a better understanding and likeness for the character. And finally, we have the shadow. Could you read the description for the shadow, please?
The shadow character is the antagonist, but is often a look at the characteristics of the protagonist. The hero must face the shadow character in order to better learn about themselves, so that they can go into the third act and change their ordinary world. Shadow characters aren't the opposite of the main character, but are more often extreme foil character to the protagonist.
Yep. Great. Thank you, Lucas. Yeah, I just put that there to remind you of what a foil character is. So a foil acts to emphasize the protagonist or main character's traits and personality quirks. So characters like Darth Vader and Scar from The Lion King, they typically have some of the worst possible traits that the protagonist could have, but ultimately the protagonist doesn't go to become them. And the shadow serves as a character that the hero must face, look at themselves. It's basically like looking at themselves in a sort of period of time where they take a dark route to becoming evil. So, like for example, Luke and Darth Vader do share some traits regarding their personality and strive, but Darth Vader is what would happen if Luke got too greedy or obsessed with power. Yeah, very interesting characters. So now that we went through all that, just a small exercise. I want you to think of any character from anything that you've seen, watched, read, or played. Think of a character that could represent one of the eight archetypes presented and explain. I want you to explain why you think they represent that. And I'll give you 6 minutes to write that out. So before you begin, do you need me to go back to a particular slide if you have a character in mind?
Uh, I might ask for it in a little bit because I haven't really thought of a character.
Yeah, that's fine. Just let me know what slide you want me to go back to when you need it. And I'll give you 6 minutes starting now.
Sorry, could you skim through the archetypes quickly?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so here's the hero. How long do you need me to stay on each slide for?
Just like 10 seconds or maybe 5.
All right. Here's the herald. Here's the mentor and the ally. Here's the threshold guardian.
Hey, can you go back to the ally?
There you go.
Thanks.
Do you need me to move on to another slide, or are we okay just with this slide for the time being?
I'm okay with this.
All right, great. Let me know if you need me to move to a different slide. Okay, time's up now. How are you going along, Lucas?
Good.
Okay, thank you. Great. So could you read out your answer, please?
In the show Ted Lasso, the main character, Ted Lasso, has an assistant coach named Coach Beard. He serves as an ally and helps Ted Lasso to manage the team and help the players be the best they can be on and off the pitch. I think he is an ally because he helps Ted Lasso and challenges him occasionally.
Okay, yeah, great. Thank you, Lucas. So yeah, pretty simple explanation. That's good too. I feel like that might have been my bad. I feel like I should have challenged you a little bit more by asking you to write about one of the a specific type of archetype, but this is a good explanation. Though I want I want to know more about how sorry, how Coach Beard challenges Ted Lasso. Could you is it possible for you to write down how Beard challenges Ted Lasso?
Okay.
Yeah. I'll give you a 2 minutes, 1 or 2 minutes to write that out. How does that sound?
Good.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so you're saying that Beer challenges Ted Lasso by showing him events and ways the players react he may not like or haven't noticed. Could you emphasize a little bit more on that? Like explain just a little bit?
Like Coach Beard not guesses shows Ted Lasso that like maybe one way he's trying to coach the players isn't great.
Ah, okay. So he's saying that, oh, Ted Lasso, the way you're coaching right now, it's not improving the players. Something like that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. That's a great, that's great. Yeah. So he's challenging Ted Lasso by demonstrating that he could become a better coach if he did something a different way. That's great. I'll just let down to emphasize it a little more. Notice demonstrating that he needs to review his coaching techniques. You could write something like that too. Yeah, awesome work. And because we're using coach as a formal title for Beard, I'm going to capitalize the C here, comma over here. And so I'm going to add that. He challenges Ted by showing him events and ways the players react that he may not like or not haven't noticed. Sorry. Not haven't noticed, but hasn't noticed. We use hasn't in this case, not haven't. We use haven't we use hasn't when we're describing that it's someone else who has not recognized something. So yeah. Anyway, great work, Lucas. Again, I would like again, I asked you to explain a little more about like how Coach Beer challenges Ted Lasso because you didn't explain a whole lot about it in your initial writing. I know that you can't, so for next time, if I ask you something like this, I'd like you to try to explain, to emphasize as much as you can with the time limit I give you. So if you wrote this second part in to your initial submission, that would be a great thing to do. All right, so now we're going to look at a short story, The Secret Life of Walter Mitty by James Thurber. This is an example of a story that utilizes the hero's journey, albeit in a unique way. So it deals with a vague and mild-mannered man named Walter Mitty who drives into Waterbury, Connecticut with his wife for their weekly shopping. During this, his wife visits the beauty parlor, and in this time, Walter Mitty has five heroic daydream episodes, each inspired by some detail of his quote unquote mundane surroundings. So the way the story is structured, it's not the typical organization of a hero's journey, but you could definitely see some elements of that monomyth being represented in that story. So this will be a couple of minutes. So I'll read the first slide and then I'd like you to start reading on the second slide. We're going through. The commander's voice was like thin ice breaking. He wore his full dress uniform with the heavy braided white cap pulled down rakishly over one cold gray eye. We can't make it, sir. It's spoiling for a hurricane, if you ask me. I'm not asking you, Lieutenant Berg, said the commander. Throw on the power lights, rev her up to 8,500. We're going through. The pounding of the cylinders increased. Tapakada, pakada, 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 pakada. The commander stared at the ice forming on the pilot window. He walked over and twisted a row of complicated dials. Switch on number 8 auxiliary, he shouted. Switch on number 8 auxiliary, repeated Lieutenant Berg. Full strength in number 3 turret, shouted the commander. Full strength in number 3 turret. The crew, bending to their various tasks in the huge, hurtling eight-engine Navy hydroplane, looked at each other and grinned. The old man will get us through, they said to one another. The old man ain't afraid of hell. And while you're reading this, try to think of ways that the hero's journey could be represented in the story, because I'm going to ask you to write about that later. And yeah, you could start reading from Not So Fast.
Sorry, could you repeat that last little bit?
I'd like you to start reading from Not So Fast.
Okay, not so fast. You're driving too fast, said Mrs. Mitty. What are you driving so fast for? Said Walter Mitty. He looked at his wife in the seat beside him with shocked astonishment. She seemed grossly unfamiliar, like a strange woman who had yelled at him in a crowd. You were up to 55, she said. You know I don't like to go more than 40. You were up to 55. Walter Mitty drove on toward Waterbury in silence. The roaring of the SN 202 through the worst storm in 20 years of Navy flying, fading in the remote, intimate airways of his mind. You're tensed up again, said Mrs. Mitty. It's one of your days. I wish you'd let Dr. Renshaw look you over. Walter Mitty stopped the car in front of the building where his wife went to have her hair done. Remember to get those overshoes while I'm having my hair done, she said. I don't need overshoes, said Mitty. She put her mirror back into her bag. We've been all through that, she said, getting out of the car. You're not a young man any longer. He raced the engine a little. Why don't you wear your gloves? Have you lost your gloves? Walter Mitty reached in a pocket and brought out the gloves. He put them on, but after she had turned and gone into the building and he had driven onto a red light, he took them off again. Pick it up, brother, snapped the cop as the light changed. And Mitty hastily pulled on his glove and lurched ahead. He drove around the streets aimlessly for a time. Then he drove past the hospital on his way to the parking lot.
All right, thank you, Lucas. And could you read this next part too?
Walter Mitty stopped the car in front of the building where his wife went to have her hair done. Remember to get those overshoes while I'm having my hair done, she said. I don't need overshoes, said Mitty. She put her mirror back into her bag. We've been all through that, she said, getting out of the car. You're not a young man anymore, or any longer. He raced the engine a little. Why don't you wear your gloves? Have you lost your gloves? Walter Mitty reached in a pocket and brought out the gloves. He put them on, but after she had turned and gone into the building, and he had driven onto a red light, he took them off again. Pick it up, brother, snapped a cop as the light changed. And Mitty hastily pulled on his gloves and lurched ahead. He drove around the streets aimlessly for a time, and then he drove past the hospital on his way to the parking lot. It's the millionaire banker, Wellington McMillan, said the pretty nurse. Yes, said Walter Mitty, removing his glove slowly. Who has the case? Dr. Renshaw and Dr. Benbow, but there are two specialists here. Dr. Remington from New York and Dr. Pritchard Mitford from London. He flew over. A door opened down a long, cool corridor, and Dr. Renshaw came out. He looked distraught and haggard. Hello, Mitty, he said. We're having the devil's own time with McMillan, the millionaire banker, a close personal friend of Roosevelt, obstetrician of the Duxhill tract. Tertiary. Wish you'd take a look at him. Glad to, said Mitty.
Great, thank you, Lucas. So yeah, you could see that he's imagining things and daydreaming based off of his surroundings, his conversations, his thoughts, what's currently happening. And could you read this slide too?
In the operating room, there were whispered introductions. Dr. Remington, Dr. Mitty, Dr. Pritchard Mitford, Dr. Mitty. I read your book on steptothricosis, said Pritchard Mitford, shaking hands. A brilliant performance, sir. Thank you, said Walter Mitty. Don't know you were in the States, Mitty, grumbled Remington. Coles to Newcastle, bringing Mitford and me up here for a tertiary. You are very kind, said Mitty. A huge, complicated machine connected to the operating table with many tubes and wires began at this moment to go pocketa, pocketa, pocketa. The new anesthetizer is giving away, shouted an intern. There's no one in the East who knows how to fix it. Quiet, man, said Mitty in a low, cool voice. He sprang to the machine, which was now going pocketa, pocketa, queep, pocketa, queep. He began fingering delicately a row of glistening dials. Give me the fountain pen, he snapped. Someone handed him a fountain pen. He pulled a faulty piston out of the machine and inserted the pen in its place. That will hold for 10 minutes, he said. Get on the operation. Get on with the operation. A nurse hurried over and whispered to Renshaw, and Mitty saw the man turn pale. Choreopsis has set in, said Renshaw nervously. If you would take over, Mitty. Mitty looked at him and at the craven figure of Benbow, who drank, and at the grave uncertain faces of the two great specialists. If you wish, he said. They slipped a white gown on him. He adjusted a mask and drew on thin gloves. Nurses handed him shiny.
All right, thank you, Lucas. I'll read this slide. Back it up, Mac. Look out for that Buick. Walter Mitty jammed on the brakes. Wrong lane, Mac, said the parking lot attendant, looking at Mitty closely. Gee, yeah, muttered Mitty. He began cautiously to back out of the lane marked exit only. Leave her sit there, said the attendant. I'll put her away. Mitty got out of the car. Hey, better leave the key. Oh, said Mitty, handing the man the ignition key. The attendant vaulted into the car, backed it up with insolent skill, and put it where it belonged. They're so damn cocky, thought Walter Mitty, walking along Main Street. They think they know everything. Once he had tried to take his chains off outside New Milford, and he had got them wound around the axles. A man had to come out in a wrecking car and unwind them. A young, grinning garage man. Look, since then, Mrs. Mitty always made him drive to a garage to have the chains taken off. The next time, he thought, I'll wear my right arm in a sling. They won't grin at me then. I'll have my right arm in a sling and they'll see I couldn't possibly take the chains off myself. He kicked at the slush on the sidewalk. Overshoes, he said to himself, and he began looking for a shoe store. When he when he came out into the street again, with the overshoes and a box under his arm, Walter Mitty began to wonder what the other thing was his wife had told him to get. She had told him twice before they set out from their house for Waterbury. In a way, he hated these weekly trips to town. He was always getting something wrong. Kleenex, he thought. Squibs? Razor blades? No. Toothpaste. Toothbrush. Bicarbonate. Carborundum. Initiative and referendum? He gave it up, but she would remember it. Don't forget to, sorry. Could you read out the slide, please?
What's its name? She would ask. Don't tell me you forgot about the what's its name. A newsboy went by shouting something about the Waterbury trial. Perhaps this will refresh your memory. The district attorney suddenly thrust a heavy automatic at the quiet figure on the witness stand. Have you ever seen this before? Walter Mitty took the gun and examined it expertly. This is my Webley Vickers 5080, host said calmly. An excited buzz ran around the courtroom. The judge rapped for order. You are a crack shot with any sort of firearms, I believe, said the district attorney insinuatingly. Objection, shouted Mitty's attorney. We have shown that the defender could not have fired the shot. We have shown that he wore his right arm in a sling on the night of the 14th of July. Walter Mitty raised his hand briefly, and the bickering attorneys were stilled. With any known make of gun, he said calm, evenly, I could have killed Gregory Fitzher at 300 feet with my left hand. Pandemonium broke loose in the courtroom. A woman's scream rose above the bedlam, and suddenly a lovely dark-haired girl was in Walter Mitty's arms. The district attorney struck at her savagely without rising from his chair. Mitty let the man have it on the point of the chin. You miserable cur.
Okay, thank you. And could you read this slide too?
Puppy Biscuit, said Walter Mitty. He stopped walking, and the buildings of Waterbury rose up out of the misty courtroom and surrounded him again. A woman who was passing laughed. He said, Puppy Biscuit, she said to her companion. That man said Puppy Biscuit to himself. Water Walter Mitty hurried on. He went into an A&P, not the first one he came to, but a smaller one further up the street. I want some biscuit for small young dogs, he said to the clerk. Any special brand, sir? The greatest pistol shot in the world thought a moment. It says puppies bark for it on the box, said Walter Mitty. His wife would be through at the hairdresser's in 15 minutes. Mitty saw in looking at his watch, unless they had trouble drying it. Sometimes they had trouble drying it. She didn't like to get to the hotel first. She would want him to be there waiting for her as usual. He found a big leather chair in the lobby facing a window, and he put the overshoes and the puppy biscuit on the floor beside it. He picked up an old copy of Liberty and sank down into the chair. Can Germany conquer the world through the air? Walter Mitty looked at the pictures of bombing planes and of ruined streets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you, Lucas. And could you read this slide too, please?
The cannonading has got the wind in young Raleigh, sir, said the sergeant. Captain Mitty looked up at him through tousled hair. Get him to bed, he said wearily. With the others, I'll fly alone, but you can't, sir, said the sergeant anxiously. It takes 2 men to handle that bomber, and the Arkies are pounding hell out of the air. Von Richtmann's circus is between here and Solier. Somebody's got to get that ammunition dumped, said Mitty. I'm going over. Spot of brandy. Uh, he poured a drink for the sergeant and one for himself. War thundered and whined around the dugout and battered at the door. There was a rending of wood and splinters flew through the room. A bit of a near thing, said Captain Mitty carelessly. The box barrage is closing in, said the sergeant. We only live once, sergeant, said Mitty with his faint, fleeting smile. Or do we? He poured another brandy and tossed it off. I never see a man could hold. I never see a man could hold his brandy like you, sir, said the sergeant. Begging your pardon, sir. Captain Mitty stood up and strapped on his huge Webley Vickers automatic. It's 40 kilometers through hell, sir, said the sergeant. Mitty finished one last brandy. After all, he said softly, what isn't? The pounding of the cannon increased. There was the rat tatting of there was the rat tat tatting
Mm-hmm.
of machine guns, and from somewhere came the menacing pocket of the new flamethrowers. Walter Mitty walked to the door of the dugout, humming Après de ma blonde. He turned and waved to the sergeant. Cheerio, he said.
Thank you. And yep, this is the end. The last slide. Could you read out both paragraphs, please?
Something struck his shoulder. I've been looking all over this hotel for you, said Mrs. Mitty. Why do you have to hide in this old chair? How did you expect me to find you? Things closed in, said Walter Mitty vaguely. What? Mrs. Mitty said. Did you get the what's its name? The puppy biscuit? What's in that box? Overshoes, said Mitty. Couldn't you have put them on in the store? I was thinking, said Walter Mitty. Does it ever occur to you that I'm sometimes thinking? She looked at him. I'm gonna take your temperature when I get you home, she said. They went out through the revolving doors that made a faintly derisive
Derisive.
derisive whistling sound when you pushed them. It was 2 blocks from to the parking lot. At the drugstore on the corner, she said, "Wait for me here, or wait here for me. I forgot something. It won't be a minute." She was more than a minute. Walter Mitty lighted a cigar. It began to rain with sleet in it. He stood up together. He stood up against the wall of the drugstore, smoking. He put his shoulders back and his heels together. To hell with the handkerchief, said Waker Mitty scornfully.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
a edit. That's an error. Sorry about that. That should say Walter Mitty, obviously.
okay. He took one last drag on his cigarette and snapped it away. Then, with that faint, fleeting smile playing about his lips, he faced the firing squad, erect and motionless, proud and disdainful. Walter Mitty, the undefeated, inscrutable to the last.
Great reading. Thank you, Lucas. So what do you think of the story?
It's interesting.
Yeah, how so? I think it's interesting too.
It's a very unique concept.
Yeah, with the way he's daydreaming about these grandiose adventures during his normal life. Yeah, I found that really interesting too. Very unique way of illustrating what goes on in someone's mind or like how they react to others. It's pretty cool. It kind of makes you feel like a younger than you are like when you daydream just about anything based off of what you see in your surroundings. Has that sort of childish feel to it. Do you agree?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, I hope you've been paying some good attention to what you've been reading. I'm sure you have. I'm going to ask you a couple of just a few things regarding this story. So first, I hinted at this at the beginning of the reading. I want you to try and identify some stages from the hero's journey that were used in this story. Be concise with your writing and try to bring up, I want you to try to bring up 3 or 4 instances, 3 or 4 stages from the hero's journey that you think were used in the story. And I'll give you 8 minutes to do it. I could bring you back to the stages of the hero's journey slides if you need. Do you want me to do that?
It's okay.
All right, great. So, yeah, 8 minutes, 3 to 4 stages from the hero's journey that you think were used in The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. And yeah, you can begin. All right, it's been 8 minutes now. How's your writing coming along, Lucas?
I only have two instances.
Oh, okay. You can come up with one more then. Yeah. How much more time do you think you'll need?
Maybe 2 minutes.
2 minutes? That's great. Okay. Yeah, 2 more minutes. See a submission. Thank you, Lucas. Sorry, one moment. All right. Thank you, Lucas. Could you read out your writing, please?
The first paragraph may be the call to adventure because Walter Mitty's normal life is disrupted by a hallucination. The hallucination causes Walter Mitty to disregard his wife's opinion on the speed limit. Miss Mitty could be the mentor because she provides tips, information, and recommendations to Walter Mitty. When Mrs. Mitty says she's going to take Walter Mitty's temperature, could be the belly of the whale. This is because the hallucinations have already interfered with Walter Mitty's life so much it is concerning his wife.
Okay. Thank you, Lucas. Interesting interpretations. So disrupted by a hallucination. I guess you could say it could be the call to adventure. Yeah. Uh, opinion, the mentor. Personally, I don't really see Mrs. Mitty to act like that much of a mentor. I guess in some way you could see it. And different people have different interpretations of stories, obviously, but I think I think Mrs. Mitty, I feel like, in my opinion, she could be seen as more of a herald than a mentor because she's bringing Walter Mitty to a world that he's less comfortable or familiar with. Like he's constantly reminded about his responsibility. He would be reminded about his responsibilities and taken out of his fantasies by Mrs. Mitty, for example. And what could be the belly of the whale. Hmm, the belly of the wh- I guess it's an interesting interpretation. Like when Mrs. Mitty takes Walter's temperature, it could take him out of it. Honestly, that last point is a little bit confusing. That's okay. That's okay if they don't seem as accurate as you would have liked it to be, because this is a rather unique twist and interpretation of the hero's journey that we just went through. On the next slide, I have some stages that I think were included in The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. Now, just for some general edits, that gonna say that could be the belly of the whale. His wife. Yeah. So overall, good writing, not many grammatical or punctuation errors. It's very good writing, very interesting interpretations about how the hero's journey was represented. So on this slide, I wrote down some examples of what I think could have the hero, what I think in the story could represent stages of the hero's journey. So crossing the threshold, it would be when Walter Mitty experiences several daydreams that more or less serve as an escape from the ordinary world, where he goes on adventures of his own. So this could be crossing the threshold could be interpreted in two ways. Either that, where he jumps into a brand new world every single time out of his ordinary life, or you could interpret his daydreams. You could interpret his daydreams being his so-called comfort zone, like how Luke's home farm on Tatooine is his comfort zone in Star Wars. But then whenever he has to jump into the real world, he constantly crosses the threshold because he needs to take on responsibilities and he's constantly disrupted from his state of daydreaming. Refusal of the call talks about this a little further. So I see the refusal of the call in the form of Walter being forced to escape from his imagination to deal with his necessary responsibilities, such as driving his wife to the hair salon, buying the puppy biscuits and overshoes that she wanted, parking the car even. Apotheosis, which is a stage in the final portion, in close to the final portion of the hero's journey, could see it as Walter's daydreams keeping him tolerant of his current life and showing that despite his dissatisfaction with the real world, he still cares for and loves the woman that he married. So this would be assuming that when you cross the threshold, Walter is going from his daydreams to the real world. We see that even though Walter Mitty finds his life mundane, he realizes the purpose of why he keeps doing it to satisfy his wife, to keep her happy because he truly does care about her. And finally, we have the rescue of Without. Walter, despite not enjoying the ordinary world he lives in, commits to his wife's wishes and brings her what she wants, also showing unrequited love, similar to my explanation for apotheosis. Okay, do you have any questions?
No.
Okay. Yeah. Again, this is a pretty tough story, but a rather interesting one to look at through the lens of the hero's journey. Now, there will be more questions that I'll get into next class, like what could be the possible theme of the story. I recommend that you try to think about what a possible theme of the story could be for the beginning of next class. I also recommend that you try to think about Walter Mitty as a character because I might ask you what character archetype he could represent regarding with respect to Joseph Campbell's 8 character archetypes that he brought up. And yeah, that's what I recommend that you prepare for our next class on Thursday. Shouldn't be too difficult to do. Don't worry about it. And if you don't have any ideas that come up, that's fine because I'll be assigning you to do these in class tomorrow on Thursday anyway. So, yeah, this ends today's class. Have a great rest of your evening.
You too, bye.
Bye, Lucas.